Welcome to the Car Deal Advisor Podcast Show. The presenter of this show is Hugh Hetrick. Get ready for special motoring legends and great deals on your next set of wheels. So the 5 red lights have just gone out and it's go, go, go.
Hello and welcome to the Car Deal Advisor Podcast Show with me, Hugh Hetrick, and my very special guest, Chris Haye.
Hello.
Good morning, Chris. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. And yourself, Hugh?
I'm very well, thanks. Very well, thanks. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. And you've got such an experience of simulator games. I just can't wait to get into all of that. So it's going to be a really exciting show today as we dive into the more controversial aspects of what it's like to do gaming and sim racing. So to get started, Chris, the big question to start with is, how did it all begin? What drew you to sim racing and what you do just now?
Well, I think like a lot of sim racing fans, I started off as primarily a motorsport fan. I've been watching, I started like everyone with the Formula One. The first Grand Prix I watched was the German Grand Prix in 1991. I've just been, I'm in my mid-30s. So I started watching when I was quite young. My dad was sort of drawn in by, I think he's been an on and off occasional fan for most of his life, but he was drawn back in by Mansellmania. And,
that was good.
it was a good time to be a Formula One fan. And then it sort of went on from there, and my interest grew into sort of sports car racing and pretty much anything else, really. It really helped that Mansell went across to IndyCar in '93 as well, and that gave me an appreciation for racing across the pond and some of the nuances there. But the sim racing side of things kicked off because Dad picked up a copy of Jeff Crammond's Grand Prix on the PC in what must have been 1992. And this was one of the earliest racing sims, really. You know, we were playing it on a keyboard. So
I remember that. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yep.
So perhaps some nuance was lost on the simulation side compared to where we are now, but I must have spent hundreds of hours on that as a kid. And then Grand Prix 2 came out, and then the Papyrus NASCAR games, the IndyCar game, and NASCAR racing, and all of this other stuff. I just played any game I could get my hands on, and then consoles came along. So things like Gran Turismo, the first and second Gran Turismo in particular, I couldn't stop playing. And then just all through the sort of console progression, doing anything I could get hold of on the PC. And then maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I slowed down a bit on that side of things and really only just sort of played casually until sort of about 3 years ago, I picked up a title called Assetto Corsa. On the PlayStation 4 at the time. And I thought, Jesus, this has come along a long way in the last few years. This is really, really good. And then I did some Googling around and I realized, there's all these mods for this. Oh, I can't get them on the PlayStation. All right, I'll have to get a PC. Oh, and then I had to get a wheel. And then I had to get this and that and the other. And it's just become an obsession. It's what I always wanted sim racing to be, which was, for me, it was a way to experience cars that I would never get a chance to drive in real life. Nobody is ever going to let me drive a Porsche 962 down the Mulsanne Straight. It's never going to happen. For good reasons, I'm sure. And while I could potentially go and do some club racing, or maybe, if I get a lottery win, go and do the gentleman driver type thing. But I'm never going to get a chance to go back to 1986 and drive a Porsche 962 at Le Mans. And that was a window into a world that's just, it seemed completely alien at the time, but completely natural. And I think a lot of people in what we would describe as the sort of more sim racing end rather than the esports end of the hobby, I think there are a lot of people with similar experiences to that from those I've spoken to.
Yeah. Well, it sounds amazing. I remember my first ever game. I had an Acorn A3000, which shows how old I am, in my early 40s. And I think it was a game called Saloon Cars. And you had to use a keyboard for that because I wasn't allowed to get a joystick or any kind of application you could get at the time to make those better. And I played it on a green monitor. And that was me But it was great because if you had a big crash, it just said, "You are dead." And that was it. It was brilliant. You heard a bop. And then that was it. Your game was finished.
I like I like that the game sort of is very literal. It's just called Saloon Car Racing and You're Dead. There's no mixing words there, is it? They're just going for it. Delivering on their promises.
I would always crash at Brands Hatch. The first corner at Brands Hatch, I'd end up spinning off and hitting the wall, and then that would be me. I would qualify really well, like get a pole position in an old Vauxhall Astra. That was as good as they had. And then in turn, I would write it off by the end of the first bend,
It's my dream to write off a Vauxhall Astra as a frequent Astra owner through my life at Paddock Hill Bend at Brands Hatch. I think I would that would be my dream realised. And to be fair, you're not alone crashing at Paddock Hill Bend. Frequent visitor to Brands and frequent sim racer. Lots of people go off there. You've got to.
Yeah, I think that's exactly when you're trying to learn how to do it, isn't it? Because it kind of calls you in that corner, and it's very easy to go out wide, isn't it?
The racing line is about 10 feet into the gravel. So
yeah. I always remember it because you had also a great choice of mechanics to try and help your get your crew to work a bit better. And if you couldn't afford it, if you hadn't done well enough, you had the only mechanic you had was Bill Busted. So that was it. So you had no chance, and you had great tyre selection. The cheapest tyre was Fatal Slip. I remember that. And it was brilliant. It was very, very funny.
I think I was offered that at Quick Fit the other day, actually.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Your cheap tyres, and it's like, but it was great fun. So it was as much a laugh to do it as it was to try and play. But I found I'd go through my tyres in the first couple of laps, and then I'd be struggling with everybody else hearing past me. So yeah, there's come on a long way. But so it's interesting. So you did lots of kind of. I never played that Grand Prix simulator, the one that you mentioned right at the start.
Yeah, Jeff Hammond was really well known for a period of probably about 10 or 12 years for being, or maybe even longer than that, for being at the sort of forefront of simulation stuff throughout the 90s. And there were a series of games called Grand Prix, published by Microprose. I think the final one was Grand Prix 4, at which point I think the legal complications of having a Formula One license were a bit difficult. I mean, it was always a bit tricky. I remember one of the games once, Jacques Villeneuve was about, his name wasn't in it properly because he wouldn't license it. And as the sport got more professional and more money flowed into it, and the era when lots of banks were involved in Formula One, it became a bit more tricky.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because my first real taste of simulators was like the F1 games. That they had for PlayStation, early PlayStations. And I think it was probably it must have been the early 2000s, I think, when I first played them. And then I'd get like F1 2005, 2006. And I really quite enjoyed them. I used to have great fun playing them.
Some of them were really good. And if I recall correctly, some of them were quite bad as they sort of jumped around who they gave the license to.
Yes, I remember that because I'm sure it was about maybe 2005, 2006. They brought out the new one and the sound quality was so much better. And it was and you could do like Jerez and lots of other tracks and some of the older cars as well. And that was far, far more fun, because they were really tough. But yeah, there were some pretty ropey graphics in some of the early versions and dodgy penalties or dodgy accidents and things like that.
You got Martin and Murray doing the commentary on a couple of them as well, which was great.
That's right. Yeah, they were really super. They were fantastic. And it was like if you had a crash and Murray said, "I do hope he's okay." And it was brilliant. Or he hit the wall with an incredible thump, and that was it. And it was like, you don't get that now, do you?
You don't, and I think that's what's missing from the Codemasters Formula One games. Actually, is some of the sense of being a fan. They've done a really good job. I've got a sort of love-hate relationship with the Codemasters Formula One games because there are certain aspects of it that frustrate the living hell out of me. But what they do is they're bringing in more and more of a kind of immersion about what it would be like to be a Formula One driver outside of the car as well as in. And it loses some of the sort of, I'm a starry-eyed Formula One fan on the other side, Well, I understand it's a driving simulator, you're supposed to be the guy in the car, but, I'd kill for a Murray Walker, Martin Brundle commentary team on Formula One 2019. I think that'd be great.
Yeah. Even though he's 95 or something, isn't he? But he's still going strong in that.
He's got a good 200 or 300 years left in him, Murray.
He's certainly got it. He's got, he's done incredibly well. We have the Scottish Motor Racing Group here in Duns, and quite a few of them go to a big do that they have every year, and they get to meet them all. And I was speaking to one of the guys, and he was saying that Murray's still quite well. I think he's recovered from his cancer. I think because he had a cancer. I'm not sure how serious it was, but thankfully I think he's on the mend. But obviously he's just taking it really easy. It's poor old Sterling Moss that seems to be in quite a bad way health wise. But it's amazing what Murray has been able to do. And I kind of wish, because also, I don't know about you, but when they changed the engines from Formula One, from the V8s to the V6s, and now the sound is just nowhere near as good. I miss that on the simulators, because like when you had an F1 2012 and the engines sounded phenomenal.
That's the big downside of racing sims, particularly the very well put together ones, is that you can go from driving a V10 era Formula One car, say from the mid 2000s, screaming banshee of a car, spitting fire, just totally ridiculous car, and then you load up a 2015 hybrid car, and you think, I can't drive this car. If I hadn't been
it's horrible. It's horrible.
If I hadn't been driving that one before, this would have been fine. So while I don't necessarily sort of deify that particular era, the mid 2000s, I think a lot of people of my age group, look back and that's, it was the best era of Formula. It was fantastic. A lot of the racing was quite average actually, and some of the racing happening today is a lot better. I think people get a bit distracted by the nostalgia factor. They cast away all the bad bits and just remember all the good stuff. But you can't argue that those cars sounded something else. They were just ridiculous.
I hope, because I know that they've done some of the classic cars on the current. I've got F1 2018, and to be fair, I quite like the game, and I do quite like playing it. It's quite fun. But the cars of 2012, 2013, those V8 kind of screaming engines. I went to some of the testing sessions. It was 2011 when I last went in Jerez, the noise was incredible. And you could get really close to the track at Jerez, and get all the the close-ups as they fly by. And when they used to bang the car out on the rev limiter as they used to do their pretend warm-up laps, was just the most amazing thing I've ever heard. And I think that would, if you could get more of that kind of sound into a racing game, I think that would just be phenomenal. So maybe, I don't know what they'll be planning for the future, but that would certainly be what I would like.
Sound is an underrated aspect of racing sims. Just before we started, you referenced a video that I made last week, sort of comparing what the best sim is for beginners. And I purposely left sound out of the video because I don't think it's necessarily the biggest consideration when you're just starting out. But one of the things that Race Room in particular is praised for is how immersive the sound is. It's absolutely fantastic. It makes some of the crap cars sound great. You find the most boring sort of front wheel drive touring car that you dislike, picture whichever one you like, and it still sounds great. You turn the volume up and or it's all of the immersive sound. It's the wind off of the windscreen that goes in there. It's the transmission whine. It's the stones bouncing off the bottom of the under tray of the car. It's just everything is. It really feels like you're in it, and that's hugely important. And it varies between sim to sim, and sometimes between car to car how well they do it.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? I love the Aston Martin V8s in some of their kind of GT3 championships on Gran Turismo. That's the main game I have for that. Although I have to say, I do have Assetto Corsa, but I've not played it as much. But we'll get on to that in a wee minute there. But
my favourite subject.
Yes. Well, no, it's going to be really interesting for me as well because I've only played it a little bit. So you've definitely you've caught my eye there with that, as to say, right, how can I make that a bit better and do a bit more on that? But because I'm on PlayStation with the Assetto Corsa, and I think I might need to change to PC. It sounds. To get
it's a
more
slippery
out of it, I think.
It's a very slippery slope.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, we'll come to the end of this segment, and we'll be right back in a few seconds after this very quick. At cardioadvisor.co.uk, we can help you save thousands of pounds on your next new car or van. And we can also source second-hand cars as well. And we can save you money on car rental, whether it be in the UK and abroad. Just click our rental link on the website. And we'll give you a free gift if you trade in your car with We Buy Any Car using our special website link. So go to the website now and see how much you can save. And it's back to the show. Thanks for listening. And welcome back to the Cardio Advisor podcast show with me, Hugh Hattrick, and my very special guest, Chris Haye. Welcome back, Chris.
Hiya.
Well, we were talking just before the break about Assetto Corsa. We just started on that topic. Now, this is the big subject of the day. Assetto Corsa. What do you think? Why is it one of your favourite games?
Well, I think it was one of the modern breed of sims that I sort of stumbled across first. I had some experience from R Factor from before I took a bit of a pause from sim racing, but I came back. I picked up a copy of Assetto Corsa in game for my PlayStation at the time.
Uh-huh.
I started playing it, realized everything had sort of skipped on a bit and was like, right, okay, I'll get a PC, get the mods going, get everything else. What stands out about Assetto Corsa above all of the other sims at the moment is the breadth and variety of content available for it. If you are wanting to recreate 1960s Formula One or say 1980s sports car racing, or do some drifting, or do some toge, the pursuit race, the Japanese style pursuit racing, you want to do cruising on a big open world map, there is no other racing sim that really has that kind of variety of content available to it. And a lot of that is made possible by the modding community. Kunos, who produced Assetto Corsa, have allowed people the toolkit to get into their game and create mods for it. They made it a very open platform, which means that there is a almost endless variety of mods available. You name it, it's available. Someone's made a Lego car for Assetto Corsa. Someone's made the Honda racing lawnmower that they did for Assetto Corsa. There is one of the most accurate mods available is for a Ford Transit. I can tell you it's accurate because I've driven lots of Transits throughout my life and it drives perfectly. It is exactly how a Transit behaves. And that's
amazing.
Obviously, there's a lot of stuff. Maybe I'm not selling it. There's a lot of really interesting racing cars and circuits and all of those that are available from the mod community, some of which go into excruciating levels of detail. There are modders who go to the effort of getting laser scans made of tracks. They'll commission a company or go and do it themselves. They'll take a bunch of laser scanning of equipment and spend days taking a very detailed point cloud of a racing venue, to get the level of accuracy that you would expect from, a modern racing game. But this is a guy doing it in his spare time, in his spare bedroom for fun.
Uh-huh.
Usually occasionally they'll put up a link saying, if you want to tip me the price of a cup of coffee, you can do. And I encourage anyone that really enjoys Assetto Corsa to do so, because it's such a strong and vibrant and, dare I say it, healthy community at the moment that encourage these people to keep going. Do not let them away from their computers.
Yeah, that's it. Let them earn from their home and make all these excellent mods. Because I've only played Assetto Corsa from the PlayStation side, and I was quite impressed with it, to be fair. But when I see all these things about mods, to be fair, I didn't know really exactly what a modification was, until obviously I realised that it's like an upgrade type thing for the game. And of course, you just let me know that you can't get that for PS4.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a pain, isn't it? Because you can buy upgrades for the games and different things and extras. But a mod is obviously a more like a kind of free app that you can tip if you want to, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So how does it work on the PC? Because I've got like a Logitech G29 wheel, which I just plug into my PlayStation. Is it easy to do something like that, to plug it into a PC and there you go, just get the PC copy and start racing that way?
Absolutely, yeah. G29 is where most people start, either that or the Thrustmaster T300. They're pretty sort of similar, but across the two main providers. They both work across the consoles and PCs. So you'd plug it into a USB port, download the drivers from the Logitech website, and away you go. Assetto Corsa, as in stock form, is pretty much plug and play. And to be honest, when I went straight from the PlayStation to the PC a few years ago with it, I barely noticed a difference between the two versions of the game. Such is the sort of quality of the conversion that they did for the PlayStation. There are a few things like, some of the tracks allow a few more cars on them because, PC's got more processing power available. You won't notice a difference. Where you will start to notice the difference is when you start digging into it, when you start adding on mods There's a mod for everything. So this year we've been treated to an absolute sort of game-changing. It's unfair to call it a mod because it's so important. It's a thing called Sol Weather, and it completely overhauls the visuals of the game. It's built upon a platform of shader modifications, which is very technical and not worth getting into here, by a guy called Ilya. And between the two of those things, the Assetto Corsa looks completely different on the PC now. If you run the shaders mod and Sol Weather, you've got this incredibly immersive weather landscape that is, in my opinion, the equal of titles like Gran Turismo and Forza, and on the PC side of things, what Assetto Corsa Competizione is doing now. So it's taken this 5-year-old title, which I don't think was particularly graphically advanced at the time. It was okay. It wasn't really rewriting the rule book. It's taking this 5-year-old title and it makes it look stunning, which as a video creator like myself, I am very pleased about.
Yeah. No, I mean, it sounds really good. I mean, is it quite easy? I take it it's a matter of loading up the game onto the PC, and then how do you actually go to get a mod? Is there like a kind of section to get upgrades, or how does it work?
There's not it's not like being on the PlayStation or on Steam, where they have the workshop side of things where you can just browse and click a button and it automatically loads it. But there is a website called Race Department, which you and your listeners may be familiar with if you're into sim racing. And they have a huge mod database on there. And you can browse through this. It's all free, completely free. You can browse through this, pick one you like, download it. It puts a zip file on your desktop or wherever your download folder is. You extract that and you just drag the file. Just drag the folder into where Assetto Corsa is installed. It's as simple as that. You just copy the files in. It's not one click. It might take you 30 seconds, but it is very straightforward. And what was, by and large, everything plays nicely with each other. I've run into very few issues with compatibility and things like that, which is miraculous, frankly, but it just seems to work.
No, that's quite something. What was the name again of that? Just so I can write that down and I can put that
Race Department.
Race Department.
Yeah, I'm always plugging them, but they have a fantastic community built around the sort of simulator side of sim racing rather than maybe the competitive side, which, I think I mentioned before. On the PC, the competitive side is focused very much around iRacing, and on consoles, you've got GT Sport and Forza running their esports side of things. So Race Department, while it does cover that, I think is a good home for those of us that see sim racing as, I don't know, I think I described it before as a bit of a historical reenactment, or just because you've got enough cards, maybe motorsport fans. I don't know. There's not a division like that. It's not an us versus them sort of mentality, but the community is a bit more focused on maybe motorsport and driving side of things rather than necessarily complete competitiveness. I'm going to get in trouble now because everyone's going to disagree with me on that, but that's just how I see it.
No, I think that's a really good way to describe it, though, a kind of historical reenactment, because that's what a lot of people like, because you've seen different eras of racing and you'd love to go back to certain parts. It was like, I was on whose live stream, it was the Key 25 on, I think it was Sunday night. And he was saying, they're talking about different cars. And I was saying, I'd love to have the BTCC cars from the early 90s.
Oh, God.
On Gran Turismo Sport.
Wouldn't we all?
Yeah.
In every
Can you imagine that on a multiplayer? That would just be horrendous. It would be crashing everywhere, but it'd be great fun.
Online server racing is basically early 90s BTCC racing. Everyone's just barging into each other all the time. You might as well be in the right card for it,
Exactly, the old Vauxhall Cavaliers, all this stuff, the Toyota Avensis, I think it was, or no, it wouldn't be the Avensis, it was, what was the one before it? It was the, it's gone right out of my head. It wasn't the Corolla, it was the hatchback. I'm trying to think of the saloon.
Oh, you've lost me.
It was, what was it? It was like, and then they had in 94, they had the Alpha 155 with Tarquini.
Yeah, one of my
that was a phenomenal car.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to get those kind of cars would be fantastic, and things like Not Kill and other tracks should be
very early 90s cars in Assetto Corsa. You've got the Mercedes 190e, the BMW M3, and the Alpha are in Assetto Corsa. As I think they're all none of them are the stock content, but they're all official produced cars by Kunos, and they're always very
Yeah.
popular. I certainly enjoy thrashing them around Donington because that's
no, they were good, weren't they?
Although, yeah,
Aye, exactly. Aye. No, I remember that, things like the Nissan Primera, and then you had the Volvo Estate, didn't you? They had the Volvo V70 Estate.
no one's done a mod for the Volvo, which is a shame because back in the old Toka Touring Car game days, that was always my car because to be fair, where there were only about 7 polygons on the screen, rendering the shape of a Volvo was probably much easier than all of the more complex shaped cars.
Yeah, I remember I really enjoyed Toka Touring Cars. That was a great game. That was the other game. I'd forgotten about that. I'd had that game. And I think I had the second one as well. They did Toka Touring Cars too. And then I think they ran out of money. Yeah. And I remember
yeah.
you could there was a great race at Silverstone. I was doing like a kind of championship, and you could do like a Formula Ford, I think it was, or Formula Vauxhall type single seater. And I was coming round the first corner. It was at Copse Corner. And I took somebody else out. I ended up, they barrel rolled over my wheel. They went and catapulted and did a great cartwheel over my left tire. And the next lap I came round, I kid you not, the guy was actually standing next to his car waving his fist. So they must have had these kind of bits in it that were there if you did a dodgy move, and it was brilliant.
The programmers saw you coming there, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. They definitely saw me coming, but no, it was a great game. The noise was good. The crunching when you bumped into somebody was brilliant. The gravel off the wheel arches was fantastic. It was a great game for the time.
They were fantastic for the time. They were really ahead of the game in a lot of areas. And, I think a lot of what they were doing there has sort of translated across to the approach with the Formula One games as well. So, the career side of things and the immersion. And that's what really works very well about those games.
Yeah. So would you recommend then that for people who are playing PlayStation just now and mainly Gran Turismo to have a not such to jump ship, but to certainly try Assetto Corsa on potentially the PC and see how it goes, and maybe they might find that there's a lot more to it than they didn't think was there, and they could find some great racing on that game.
Yeah, there are sort of different approaches, and I think games like Gran Turismo and Forza are primarily games first and simulation second. And I don't mean that as a bad thing, but they have to cater for 99% of the user base being on a controller and doing that left a bit, right a bit thing. And some of the physics has to obviously compensate for that. So there are compromises to how some of that side of things works, but they are fantastic games primarily. And that, I can play Gran Turismo for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. Whereas you go to something like, to use something that's available on the consoles, you go to something like Assetto Corsa, it is, a simulation first. So, their primarily focus is the physics, the driving experience. And then it's a game second. So you don't really have things like, proper career modes and progressions and leveling up and customizing your cars and all of those things. All of that, if you get onto the PC, you can do all of those things with mods. And there are people that have managed to drag a pretty compelling game out of what is almost a sandbox type of environment. So the sort of person that wants a game, I don't think is necessarily going to enjoy a title like, say, Assetto Corsa or R Factor or something, or R Factor 2 or something like that is more focused on, well, we've built a simulation engine, we've built some physics, we've got some great physics, we've got some great force feedback. We've given you some cars and tracks. Off you go, do what you like with it.
Have some fun.
So if you're moving across to that sort of thing, you sort of have to understand what they're going for, because it's very easy to sort of miss the point. I think I picked up, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent there. I'm not going to go there.
No, it's fine. Carry on.
I think Assetto Corsa on the PlayStation offers a taste of what the more simulation-driven side of sim racing is like. And it's probably, I don't know how much it costs on the PlayStation these days or the Xbox, but because it's an older title, I'd imagine you could pick it up pretty cheap and get it.
Yeah, wasn't it? Yeah. It was about 20 quid when I got it, which is really not bad. That was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I imagine it's sort of bargain bin prices because it's no longer a current game. But it's one of those things, without wanting to sort of be that guy, but the simulation side of things is very much focused around the PC titles rather than console, unfortunately. Yeah. And I think that Project Cars 2 and Assetto Corsa were the first sort of real simulation focused titles that went onto consoles, and I hope that it worked out commercially for those guys to do that, because I think it would be great if that was a side of things was accessible to more console players. I get probably 2 or 3 comments a day on various videos, basically people being like, "Oh man, I wish I could have this on my PlayStation," or "I wish I could do this on the Xbox." And it's a real shame that PC gaming is still there's a little bit of some hurdles to jump across. The hardware's more expensive. The hardware's a little bit more complex. There's more faff. And it would be great if you could just play R Factor 2, for example, in your living room. I wouldn't do it in the living room. You got to have a seat, but you know what I mean. I know what you mean. Yeah. Play a title like that without having to go through all the sort of gatekeeping that happens with PC gaming. That's mostly just because of the hardware and everything else.
Yeah. Well, it's really good to know. And you mentioned there Project Cars 2. I was a big fan of the first one. I got it for PlayStation, and I really liked it. And I love doing the time trial. And I got on 1 or 2 areas. I was in like the top 5, in the world for some of the time trials, which was quite fun. But when I got Project Cars 2, it was a completely different game. And it was much, much harder to drive. And I found myself getting absolutely nowhere. It was, even on the wheel, I was struggling. Well, I thought I would be much better on the...
This is where there are some problems with the Project Cars series of games without wanting to upset any of their fan base, where some of the cars in their stock state have setups that I think were developed by a random number generator rather than a human being. So some of the suspension geometry is just mental. Some of the gearing's totally nuts. So it's just out of the box. Some of the cars are completely undrivable. And to get a working setup on a car in a racing sim, especially Project Cars 2, which has got a really in-depth setup, and you can change the bump stops, you can change the rubbers in the dampers, you can change all sorts of things that some other sims obfuscate some of that detail away to make it just a little bit more sensible. And all more power to them for doing that. But the problem is when the default setup in some of these cars just doesn't behave well in the physics engine they've developed, it makes it so bloody hard to drive some of them out of the box. Yeah. And then you've got to go and put a few hours in to really get the setup working well. And no one's got time for that. It means people I think loads of people wrote off Project Cars too early on, and I consider myself one of those people, incidentally.
I found it very hard.
Very early because they couldn't get past some of the crap setups. But then you drive a car that the setup works well with the car and the tyre model and the physics engine and all of those things. Like the Alfa Romeo, the 1950s Alfa Romeo, it's kind of the DBR1.
All right.
Not the Alfa, it's Jaguar. What am I talking about? The Sterling Moss car, just absolutely astounding driving experience. The tyre model works really well for it. It's got that 1950s car, 1950s tyre sort of drift model to it. The back end set out, and it's a gentle slide, and you correct it, and it doesn't snap particularly. It does if you are a bit stupid with the weight management, and as you would expect it to. But it's a very plausible, believable experience. And there are lots of other cars that are like that, but there are equally as many that are just put the start in the bin and start again. And
I see. For me,
very frustrating.
So for me, I found I didn't really know where to start in terms of the setup, because I would try and vary things, but it would tend to make it worse. So I was trying to find out if there was someone who did a manual on how to set up your car on these games. I think that would be a huge success. I did a video series on setups. I got myself. I'll have to go to that.
I set myself a target to do this because there are some articles online, but they're pretty. They're either really, really detailed in one aspect, or they try and cover everything, and it's you have to sort of be quite low detail to do that. I did this series of videos, and I think it ended up being an hour and 40 or an hour and 50 minutes or something entirety across the whole series. Because, just one 5 or 6 minute video focusing on each area, and it just became such a giant job to do all of that it's really something that needs to be in a book. And there are books on setting up race cars in the real world, and in theory, this should all, it does all translate reasonably well, but you then have to understand what the limitations of the particular simulator you're driving is. Again, something like a Forza or an Assetto Corsa is going to obfuscate away some of the detail in the setup side of things and in the physics side of things to make it more playable on a controller. Whereas an R Factor 2 at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, which is, I think is widely regarded by most people to have the most plausible sim engine of all the current sims. And it's certainly the one you see cropping up in professional well, when I say professional simulators, I mean those being run by race teams. At the other end of the spectrum, it's just incredibly complex and detailed. So you need to have your eyes on everything.
Because that was the thing, because I used to really enjoy the fact that in Project Cars 1, you could just jump in and drive and set quite a good time and have quite good races throughout the championship seasons and different things like that. It was quite a laugh. And I loved all the different circuits and the long kind of, they had one in Marseille and you had this great 12-mile long road race that you had to do, which was fantastic fun. The second one just totally put me off. I mean, put it this way, as a Scotsman, I couldn't even get round Knock Hill without going backwards in any car at all, just about. And I thought, what on earth is going on? And it was like, that was with like traction control on and everything on. And it was just either understeer or not steer with a wheel or anything. And then spin you round. So it was, I think I wasn't doing myself justice.
They've sort of struggled to understand where to position that title as they've gone through. It was supposed, I don't know what it was supposed to start out as, but they had this huge hit with Project Cars 1. And then Project Cars 2, they tried to capture a bit more of the simulation crowd. They tried to cure a lot of the issues for the first one, but it was very buggy on the PC. So the sim racing crowd, sort of the race department crowd, if you will, were very displeased with it. And I was as well. It was buggy and it was very difficult to get into on the PC. So I think they lost a lot of that audience. You will see a lot of people in the sort of the sim racing circles rather than the esports circles, saying, well, we'll never buy another Project Cars, title because of what we've been through with the first two. And now they're saying with the third one that it's going to go back towards a more sort of Need for Speed type thing. So again, they're changing it. They've got this thing that is really quite well done for the most part, but has a few sort of really prominent issues, and they just don't know what to do with it. Or they keep changing their mind about what to do with it. Whether they don't know or not is beyond me. Well above my pay grade, that question.
It'll be interesting to see what the third one is like. If it does go back more to like the first one, and it could be quite a good game. It could be because certainly I really enjoyed it on PlayStation. I really liked it. So it'll be, but the second one almost put me off, as you say. It was that hard. It just wasn't worth the effort.
It goes back to the thing I was saying earlier, where there's a bit of a conflict between it be whether it's a game or whether it's a simulator. A pure simulator, they're not going to divert any resources into having an interesting career mode or challenges or achievements or all of the things that keep people playing. Whereas on the other side, all of those things matter because that's what gets people playing the game. It gets people buying the DLC when it comes out. It's much more commercially sensible. You look at the number of people, to compare the two. I don't know how many people each week log into Gran Turismo Sport, but it's probably in the millions. But if you look at the Steam user stats for R Factor 2, which I adore, it's a wonderful driving experience, but I think it's less, it might even be less than 4 figures. It's really? hundreds of people, unique logins a week. Or it may be 4 figures, but less than 5. I forget the numbers. They were published recently, but it's a staggeringly small number. So if you think about how that pans out to the commercial side of things, Project Cars 2 on the PC was only about midway up the list of simulators being played. And that's clearly what you would title it as a AAA title. It probably sold 6 or 7 figures on consoles, but PC players haven't taken to it. So I understand why they would try and segue towards a more gamer-friendly experience rather than trying to appease us sim racing nerds.
It'll be interesting to see how it comes out, and certainly. But I'm now, as you've been talking about iRacing and also R Racer, was it?
R Factor.
R Factor. Though there too, I've heard of iRacing because I was at Goodwood last year for the Festival of Speed, and they had a brilliant tent for iRacing, and you could go along and pay a couple of pounds and have a go on one of their simulator setups.
That's probably the cheapest way you can experience iRacing. That's a joke for the sim racing nerds out there.
But no, it was great. I mean, I have to say I was quite inspired by it. And it's one of my goals to actually have a sim centre where people can come in and drive the latest kind of simulator games and that kind of setup. So I've asked about it and they've given me information, and I think it's quite it's quite interesting. They've got the latest seat has all the hydraulics to it. So, it's like being in a proper simulator that everything moves. So you feel the G-forces a bit, or, the way that the car, when you turn a corner, you can actually feel the body roll and all the rest of it, so you get more of a feel. And then even their standards, seat and setup seems to be quite fun. But the iRacing game and also R Factor, again, obviously they're PC only. Do you need a very kind of powerful computer to run something like that? Or is it something that people could just have a go on?
Surprisingly enough, iRacing is really, it's really well optimized. It's not the most graphically intensive sim out there, but of all the sims, I probably get the best frame rate in iRacing. So it certainly doesn't need an absolute top spec PC to run. R Factor 2 again is similar, but some of the new content for it is a bit more graphically complex and does need a higher end PC. But I think the thing about iRacing is they do so well is that they have found that crossover between esports and simulation, and they've made it work in a way that I don't think anyone else yet has, in the sense that they have a pretty well refined sim engine. It does have its limitations, as people will discuss. It's not perfect. None of them are, but they have a really refined physics engine, and they have a very refined, competitive, racing environment. The likes of, GT Sport and Forza and, Project Cars and the like have actually sort of ended up mimicking some of the things they've done with things like safety rating and, competitiveness levels and things like that. So, and that's what keeps people coming back to that. iRacing regularly has 5 figures online at any given time. So, 10,000 plus people all logged into their server and racing in various events. I logged on at 3:00 in the afternoon the other day and took part in an MX-5 Cup race, and the race was split down into, I think it was 12 splits, as they call it. So they took the entire pool of players and split it into 12 different groups of players, all with sort of 12 or 13 people in the server. And that was just one race that was going on. And that's a race that happens, 20 times a day on iRacing. There's one every hour. So it's 24 times a day. There's a lot of really competitive online racing there, with a lot, and it attracts a very serious user base as well.
Yeah. Is it, when I looked at it online, is it about £50 or £60 to apply or to buy the game? I think
there's a yearly fee. You don't have to buy the game, but it's a subscription service, and then all of the content costs on top of that. People often jokingly refer to it as iPaying, or and it is expensive. If you get a membership deal, a new member deal, it's usually sort of 50% off. But it's even with that, it's probably £50 a year, and then the tracks are $14 each, and the cars are $14 each, whatever that converts to on any given day with the way currency is working at the moment.
Aye.
So it's not cheap, but by it being expensive, God, it sounds like I'm defending it now. There is an element of gatekeeping. There's an element that keeps out people that have got a low level of investment in it. That sounds awful, but you don't get people who are just giving it a go. You get people that really want to commit to this idea for the most part. You still get bad drivers. You get bad drivers everywhere. You'll still get people who'll get angry with you and ram you off, or that don't know where the brake. You still, especially in the rookies, you still get people that haven't quite worked out where the brake pedal is at turn 1. But because of the way safety rating and the competitiveness rating works, if you stick at it and you get 10 races under your belt, a lot of that goes away. If you're a more serious driver, if you're the guy that's, not braking for turn 1, then you're going to be stuck with a lot more people that aren't braking for turn 1. But I'm assuming that most of us aspire to be a good driver rather than not.
It's not going to wreck fest every day kind of thing.
No, that's a good point. Wreckfest has just been announced as being 50% off on Steam, so I'm going to go and buy that later today, so I can take out the Destruction Derby side of things in an appropriate environment.
Now, you just mentioned the thing called Steam or Stream, or is that
Steam,
a kind of online Steam? Is that an online supply?
Yeah, it's an online. It's the online marketplace really for PC gaming. So where you'd have on the Xbox or the PlayStation, you have the Microsoft Store or the PlayStation Store, where you go and buy games and your DLC and all of that stuff. Steam is the equivalent on the PC. Most publishers publish through Steam. Some, like EA, have got their own thing because they're EA and they always have to do their own thing. The Apple of the PC gaming world. They have to sort of go their own way and sort of avoid all of the all the conventions that have been set up by everyone else.
Yeah. No, it sounds amazing actually. All these different games and the way how it all works with iRacing and R-Racing and Assetto Corsa and all these kind of things is to find something that's really, really good and stick to. I have to say, I would like to maybe try the iRacing. Because I think it looks really good when I've seen it streamed as well. Quite a lot of people play it. And I think it would be quite fun to see what it's like. And it does want you to be cleaner. And I think I like races that are, you're not trying to hit people. You're trying to do a really fast lap and improve your quality of racing and try and develop your skills. Which is sometimes really hard to do on the PlayStation.
Absolutely. The quality, and I think, it speaks volumes about the kind of people that have been attracted to iRacing as well. The quality of racing in iRacing out of the box is the best by far because of the systems they've got in place. That's why you see people like Max Verstappen and Lando Norris and Nicky Team and all sorts of other real world drivers getting involved in that. I see Raffaele Marciello's just getting on the iRacing scene. You've got just all sorts of top name, usually younger drivers, it has to be said. It's I guess a generational thing, are taking on iRacing. And I think most of that is because of the quality of the racing. And it is quite a turnkey solution as well. Something like R-Factor or Assetto Corsa, or particularly on the PC, requires a bit of faffing and, you need to get this mod to do this, you need to do that. If you're a professional racing driver, you don't have time for that kind of, messing about. But out of the box, iRacing is the cleanest racing you'll get. The only way you get that in other titles to the same extent is by getting involved in a league or a group or a championship where there's some rules enforced by people and there's at least some social pressure to not be a dick. I know that's the thing, because that's what they say. If for Gran Turismo sport is if you do the FIA races or the Nations League races, it tends to be, it moves your driver rating up a bit if you do a lot better on that. And I think sometimes those races are it's a bit easier to not to have so many accidents because of the standard online racing. People just punt you off. I've been watching Super GT doing some of the FIA races, and they are surprisingly, well, I say surprisingly, from someone who isn't a huge Gran Turismo player, I just sort of do it for a bit of fun. Watching the quality of racing that happens in those races and the professionalism is extraordinary.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from actually just watching his racing, because I remember doing one, I think it was at Brands Hatch, and I'd never done an FIA race before. And I followed how he did qualifying and how he did a number of laps, and he went in, changed his tyres because he had less fuel, came out, and so his car was lighter, had better tyres, did a much better qualifying lap. And I did the same, so I ended up qualifying about 10th out of 20. And then I did the same for his strategy for the race, and ended up 5th, which was not too bad for a first go on FIA. So you can learn, and if you keep it clean as well, it's amazing how your rating goes up. Because I'm struggling to get out of B and B for my rating on Gran Turismo. I seem to get really close to it, and then I get punted off, and I'll get like a 5-second penalty or something, and then that's you going down the ratings again. But no, it's amazing what you can learn from these shows. So that kind of brings us to the next part. So we'll have a very quick commercial break, and then we'll be right back. For more information, go to cardioadvisor.co.uk, and you can see all the special offers that we have on the website. And remember, we have our YouTube channel, which is at Hugh Hattrick, and also we have our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Anchor FM. And if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to our shows, or you can donate every month for just £1. Thanks for listening, and we'll speak to you soon. Welcome back to the Cardio Advisor podcast show with me, Hugh Hatrick, and my very special guest, Chris Haye. Well, in the third section, Chris, this is all about what are your hopes and plans for the future and how you see sim racing going.
Okay,
so
well,
how do you answer that?
Oh, yeah, let's tackle where do I see sim racing going? I think there's starting to be a convergence between the gaming side and the simulation side. And I think that esports has a huge amount, is the big cause for that, and I think this is a really, really good thing. The popularity of the Gran Turismo competitions and the driving academy and things like that is starting to spill over into the more simulation focused side of things. R Factor have got a collaboration with the McLaren Formula One team, the McLaren Shadow program, and they're doing a similar sort of thing where they get simulation drivers to get in real cars. Once they've beaten this competition, it works in exactly the same way as the Nissan competition did with Gran Turismo all those years ago. And you're starting to see this across all sorts of things. And the Formula One teams have got their own esports teams now. Again, a lot of that's through things like the main Formula One game because of the obvious commercial tie-in there. But Williams Esports and a couple of the others are on iRacing now. So all of these worlds are starting to gradually be pulled together. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I don't like having to say, there's this term in the sim racing community where people say, oh, well, that title is a sim. R Factor 2 is a sim, but this title over here, Forza Motorsport, that's Simcade. It's a simulated arcade game, or it's an arcade simulator, or it's a contraction of two words. That sort of, there's a level of elitism about that to some extent, which I dislike, intensely, and a lot of people do. But, those two games are coming at what is essentially the same thing from very different perspectives, and it's useful to have a word for it. But, you put the word arcade in anything and it does sort of cheapen it a bit, I guess.
Yes. I remember that. It's like going back to the old days when you would go to an arcade and you'd play a racing game like NASCAR or something. Or what's that one? Oh, they had so many different titles.
Oh, the Ferrari Daytona game. That was the one that always got me. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of them were quite good, and some of them you just knew that when you turned the wheel, not much happened. It was kind of, it just wasn't very involving, and that's the most amazing difference, isn't it? They seem to be so much better in that way. And I spoke to a chap, Ben Turner from Virtually Entertained. He's based at Silverstone, and they do a lot of big esports events. But I'm hoping to use them for our Jim Clark race later on, hopefully this year. And it's amazing because they do a lot of stuff with Le Mans. I think they do a big Le Mans race and a big esports race. But it's how it's all being brought together.
I think they've got, they tie in with the World Endurance Championship. I was at Silverstone this year.
That's
and they
what
had a big World Endurance Championship simulator there. So, and I think it was those guys running it, but don't quote me on that.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think you're right. And they were fantastic. I actually last year I won a PlayStation. I was at a driving event, down at Millbrook. And I got the fastest lap at Brands Hatch, and it was Ben Turner and his group that were doing it. So it was, I won this Gran Turismo, game, and also a new PlayStation 4, which was great because my last one I just packed up. So it meant I didn't have to buy another one. But it shows you it's a useful skill and you can actually earn something back with it.
All those thousands of hours are worth the price of a PlayStation 4.
Yeah, exactly. All those days I told my wife, yes, I'll be to bed in a few hours, and it's like you stay up till 2:30 in the morning playing these games, but no, it's amazing how there's such a wider scope for people to come in and have a go. And whenever there's I always find like if you're at like the Goodwood Festival of Speed or any kind of big show and they have a simulator, the queue is out the door. Everybody wants to have a go. And that's why I think it's definitely something.
The nice thing is you can have that in your spare bedroom. I do. Yeah. Okay, maybe the full motion simulators are out of reach for most people because, they cost 10, 20, 30,000 pounds. It all starts to get a bit insane. When you think about other things that you might be wanting to purchase with that, like, a pension or whatever. But, you can have a really high end, good performing simulator with no real drawbacks for the price of a really average 3 or 4 year old Ford Focus, probably 5-year-old Ford Focus. I don't know. And you can have a really great setup for that. I mean,
Aye.
And you can spend 10 hours a day on it, whatever free time you've got. That's the thing about this hobby, is that you don't have to spend that money. You can buy a G29 and a play seat. You can spend a few £100s, buy a couple of games, and that's all you need. But if you want to have a more immersive experience, you want to have a really stable rig with a bucket seat in it, and you want pedals that simulate the real forces, so you have to jump on them like your life depends on it when you're braking. And if you want to have 3 screens and virtual reality and all of these things, you can do that. And every time you add something to it, the immersion just goes up that little bit. And as I said, it's a slippery slope. It's not quite heroin, but it's
yeah, you can play for hours and hours, isn't it? And I find after Gran Turismo, after a few hours of that, I can hardly sleep, because you're so kind of thinking about what you've done in your races and how you could have improved, or if you've had a good race, you're really kind of chuffed about it. And it's actually quite hard to kind of calm down and not
the
kind
adrenaline,
of
the adrenaline you get after a long battle. You know, I did a race last week where I had a guy tailing me he was about half a second behind me for 15, 20 laps. And it was really, really, really tense. It was, it was great. He never really got close enough to make a move, but I knew if I just ran wide slightly or just missed an apex or something, that'd be it. The adrenaline high you get from that is, it's real. It's like competing in a sport. It is a sport.
Yeah, and you're sitting
in your spare bedroom. Yeah.
You do sweat away as you're turning the wheel and doing all this stuff. I have to say, I do like Super GG setup. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, you start to see some of the people with more high-end setups that have got wheels that can deliver the sort of forces that are capable, that the real car can deliver. That requires quite a bit of effort to do. You're not being battered about with the G forces, but there's a little bit of physical exertion, It's nothing like the real thing, but I mean, it's a little bit of effort, which is nice. Gives you a sense of accomplishment.
Not quite a substitute for the gym.
It's not. No, I hoped it might be, but it's just not.
Yeah, that's the thing. I have in my office. I have my exercise bike and I have my play seat and my simulator, and so that's it. That's my regards to exercise, to try and get fitter. I
used to do a lot of Forza while on the exercise bike. Actually, I missed.
All right, you could do it while you're playing it. Oh well, that's quite a. I suppose if you've got the keypad or the gamepad.
Well, yeah, when you're on the game, but I mean, you wouldn't want to do it with a wheel. It's wheel and pedals as well. I think that's where it starts to get a bit.
It's a bit more complicated, But I never thought you could, using a gamepad and still be doing exercise at the same time. That is multitasking for sure. But no, that's the thing. But, so what do I suppose you were talking about the iRacing and where it's all going and the immersiveness and how you've got this kind of more and more people getting involved. I know that they were saying that in Formula One terms, they might eventually have a group of people that will be able to play the esport version at the event, live with the real race. And then it'll be interesting to see how it goes from an esport perspective as to who crashes at turn one and
I think
so on.
They've been talking about that idea on and off for 5 or 6 years, and it's never looked particularly close. But I think Formula E actually announced that they were going to be implementing that either this season, probably not, or next. It's very much, you'll be able to just log in from an app on your phone or computer or however they're going to deploy it. And you're going to be able to race alongside virtually the guys in the real race. Lord knows how that's going to work, but I'm excited to try it. I think you touched on something there that is really important that I sort of missed out from my answer, is that this is something that's really growing. Esports has become huge in a way that, very few people predicted, and very few people outside of our bubble and the various other sort of esports bubbles, around the shooters and stuff, really understand that, it's difficult for the average guy on the street to understand that, someone can earn £5 million a year in prize winnings by playing a first person shooter, or that they can be employed by Mercedes-Benz Grand Prix team as a driver for their esports team. I mean, that's just totally inconceivable 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever. And that's drawing a huge number of people into the sport. I think it's always been motorsport fans that have come into sim racing and into driving games because to pick up a driving game beyond and play it beyond it just being a curiosity, you have to have some level of love for cars.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that, which is why Gran Turismo was so popular to start with, because it was the first sort of game that you could really get in and you could tune cars and you could, well, I can change the engine in this. That's great. I can.
Yeah, upgrade it and make it a bit faster. Yeah.
And it's the same with motorsport into the sim racing side of things as well. So, motorsport is hugely popular still, but sim racing is getting more and more popular, which is why it's being taken very seriously by the big sim racing, by the big real world racing teams.
Yeah. I always think as well, when you think about simulators, I mean, there's when you do your driving tests, and now these are a theory test, and you have to do the kind of, you're driving along, your hazard perception. And of course, anything that's done by the government is going to be really, really kind of slow and kind of old. And I remember doing it, and it was so basic, it was terrible. But for a wee while, I worked for BLM as a driving instructor in the early 2000s. And I was invited to go to the British Motor Show back in Birmingham. And they had a stand there, so they were inviting all their instructors to come. And they said, look, we've got a new simulator. You can come along and have a shot. And it was a cardboard cutout. It was like half a Vauxhall Corsa. Which was not exactly an inspiring reason to go and go to the motor show. We went there, and the thing was, nobody was driving it, right? It was a complete flop. And nobody was even interested in going on and having a shot, because it literally was the interior of a Vauxhall Corsa, which was a pretty nasty, horrible environment. From like 1993.
I had one at the time. I'm well aware of what they were like. I had a 1993 Vauxhall Corsa, as it happens.
Oh, did you? Oh, I feel for you. It was. Truly, I remember.
Truly terrible car that was.
Oh, it was a 4-speed gearbox, and similarly, the anti-roll bars were so basic. I mean, the roll, the body roll used to get in that was something else.
Yeah. Well, I went from. As a complete aside, I had a 1992 Vauxhall Nova, which had the 4-speed, and the if it had an anti-roll bar, I would be surprised. The body roll, and that got stolen because it was a Nova, and you could break into it by looking at it funny.
Yeah,
I know I did several times when I left my keys behind it. And that got stolen, and I got a 1993 Corsa, which was, it had a 5-speed gearbox, but no extra power, which didn't really help. And
they were bad cars, didn't they?
They were truly awful.
I actually sold Vauxhalls at that time for a very short period. I was doing a kind of work experience.
Oh, it's your fault, is it? Okay.
Yeah, it was my fault. And the thing was that we had a brand new one in 1993, and I took this couple out for a test drive. And it was on this road in the Borders, which is quite a windy road. And in every other car, I was used to driving like Fiat Unos and Puntos, and they were quite good handling. At least they were quite predictable. And I came round this bend and I lifted off, and the oversteer, it just snapped into oversteer. But it was because the steering was really woolly. It was really quite difficult to get it back. And I managed to get it back without crashing. And we got to the town and we changed over. And the couple that were in the car were truly horrified at what had just happened. And then, so they crawled all the way back to the garage. And then they said, no, they don't want one of those, thanks. But it was something else. But the best thing was when they did the simulator based on this car, which was truly awful, it was on a kind of mountain road run. And the thing is, everyone was playing it. When I went, it was quiet, and then all the instructors who just couldn't give a rip about the whole thing anymore. And they said, let's just go through the program and see what they could find. And when they got this mountain pass, they were just deliberately driving as badly as they could. So it was this two-way road, and so they would go around the blind corners on the wrong side of the road. And the great thing was they had other traffic. So, because it was designed to keep you safe, to kind of make you aware of what it was like driving in real life. And so, of course, people just went head on into a truck coming around the corner because they were on the wrong side of the road. And all it did, it just completely crashed, and the whole screen just went off. It wasn't used to anybody driving like this. Hesitant to say that.
Are you saying that a Vauxhall Corsa is not an appropriate hill climb car?
No, definitely. It could possibly be the only car that's even worse on a simulator than it is in real life,
What I find very fascinating about that is through my association with Assetto Corsa, there are a bunch of maps on that are sort of free roam driving simulation maps. They're not really designed for motorsports. They're designed for sort of cruising or drift and things like that, those kind of things. And every time I try and drive them like I drive on the road, it's because there's less sense of speed through a monitor or whatever, I find it impossible to stay within the speed limit. And within 2 minutes, I'm trying to cut the apexes. I'm not driving on the left or the right anymore, depending on what country it's in. And I see it. There's something mentally very different about sitting down in front of a computer and driving than there is about driving on the road in the real world. And it seems to be, to me, more of a disconnect between doing that and doing, a track day or something in a car, which makes more sense to me than trying to simulate driving on a real road. I don't know. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, they're difficult, aren't they? Because I know that they do that a lot on Forza, don't they? Do a kind of free roam on Forza, and a lot of them have different roads. But I've seen a few videos that Super GT has done on that. But I suppose it's quite fun because they have to try and get to places within a certain time. But I much prefer the kind of racing sims or the kind of the proper tracks. I think to have that kind of fun.
Definitely. But I can't driving at 30 miles an hour in a racing sim. It feels like you're standing still.
Oh, it's horrible. Isn't it? It's horrible.
I mean, 30 miles an hour on a real road, if it's quite wide, can feel very, very slow. It can feel very, very slow. And, and your perception's difficult. If you have to do 30 miles an hour on a motorway because there's an imposed speed limit or something, that feels like you're crawling. But on a sim, it's 10 times slower than that. And I don't know. I guess it's just a lack of peripheral awareness, I guess, but.
It's like that corner that they have just now at Fuji. It's at the Fuji International one. It's on Gran Turismo Sport at the moment. I think it's the third race, the Group C race, I think it is. And you've got that chicane at the end. You've got the kind of two straights and you've got to go right down into first gear and try and cut it round. And if you get it wrong, they understeer, and it just seems to take forever to get the car back onto the right line to come through, isn't it?
Fuji's current incarnation certainly isn't my favourite racetrack in the world.
No, I don't mind the one that the shorter version. They do a kind of one without the chicane at the end, and that's a wee bit better. We've seen some quite good races there. But I always remember that great race that Lewis Hamilton did in the wet there, way back in 2007. That was an incredible race. And so I've always a bit of a...
Kept him in the championship at that point, and Fernando crashed, didn't he? At the time.
Yeah, he crashed out quite spectacularly, yeah. And then I think that was the one when, was it Vettel went into Webber? But he I always remember him saying he couldn't see anything. It was like, it's always peripheral vision and listening for other cars. Because they had that kind of fog and with the water in the rain, and he just came into the first corner and he was just looking for points to try and break. But that was an incredible race. But no, I do quite like Fuji. It'd be amazing if they had a wet race. That's the thing. They don't really have wet races in Gran Turismo, but that would be maybe the next thing they might do, perhaps, to increase the chaos. You could imagine.
Here was something I was sort of segueing towards about the future of sim racing, and I talked about iRacing, but another title that's trying to bring all of it together, the sort of game side, the competitive side, and the simulation side, is Assetto Corsa Competizione. Now it's still in beta at the moment. It's still in you're getting a new build every month, and there are bits of it that are quite unfinished at the moment, but they're putting in place a very complex, safety and skills rating system. They've got some really strong underlying physics to it, and they've got a really great game side to it. And quite crucially for me, they've got the Blancpain GT series license. So, first of all, you'll be able to log in and you'll be able to play as David Perel if you want.
Oh, right. That would be quite fun. Yeah. I might take his rating down a bit.
I noticed on Twitter recently, someone asked him the question, of all the Ferrari 488 GT3s you've driven across the Sims, which is the most accurate? He sort of talked about the iRacing one and the Assetto Corsa Competizione one. And he said, no, this one feels the closest. So that's really positive for the future. Is this one title that, and I think they have some plans to take it beyond just the Blancpain license as well. We'll see where that goes, but this is sort of it's the big possibility. It's the great white hope of sim racing at the moment, is that what's going to happen with this title. First, it'll be the first sort of PC based sim racing title that takes on iRacing at their own game, which I think is really important because there's no real competitors to iRacing, which means there are bits of what they're doing that there are, graphics upgrades and things like that, and things like their day-night cycle and being able to do full 24-hour races and stuff like that took a long time for them to implement because they didn't have any pressure to do it. But Assetto Corsa again is coming along and it looks stunning. It looks fantastic, and they've got full dynamic weather, so it'll go from being a dry race, and then the clouds will roll in, and it'll get darker, and then it'll rain, and the track will get gradually wetter, and then as it dries, a dry line will develop, and all of this stuff. We've seen teasers of it. You can do bits. You can just do a wet race at the moment or a dry race. All of the dynamic stuff hasn't been implemented yet because, as I say, it's still a work in progress. But they're trying to do a lot. When is that due? It's supposed to be Q1. Oh no, I think they were saying spring. I think it's going to be a little bit delayed. I don't know. They've gone through a big rewrite because they've changed the way they're approaching something on the online side. So I think things are put back a little bit. But I would expect it to be in the first half of this year, and that has the potential to really take off and be something quite special. So we'll need to look out for that.
Yeah. Well, that's super. And what are your immediate plans for the next few weeks for your videos and things? Have you got any particular subjects you want to cover, or any categories you would like to follow?
There's lots of stuff. There's lots of stuff I can't talk about, unfortunately, because some background to people that aren't necessarily my viewers here. I started the channel last January, so it's been going for about a year, and over the last 3 or 4 months, things have massively picked up, and I've got the hang of how to get the YouTube algorithm to recommend my videos to people and start pushing the content out there. And the subscriber and viewer numbers have just rocketed upwards, which has helped. I've been really good at getting contact from sim racing developers and modders in the community and equipment manufacturers and everything. And because I've just sort of popped my head above the wall, lots of people are saying, oh, well, do you want to try this? See what you're doing about that. And, oh, I've got this thing I'd like to send you, which is a great position to be in. As someone who is a massive fan of the hobby and lives and breathes this stuff, if someone says, can I send you this? What do you think about it? I'm waiting by the letterbox for it to fall through, So, I have a bunch of equipment reviews and reviews of some software and mods and stuff that's coming up, and I can't talk about any of them, which is really annoying. But
not to worry.
As for future plans for the channel, it's more of just a case of keeping doing what I'm doing and just trying to grow things quite organically, really. I think I've got the hang of how YouTube works now. I'm still learning from video to video. There are things that my mentality is just try and find one thing that you didn't like in the last video and improve it for the next one. Because YouTube sort of demands that you put out 2 or 3 videos a week minimum, you end up making 100, 150 videos a year. So there's quite a lot of scope for improvement by taking that sort of thing on. So just hoping that things just keep going the way they're going, because it's great at the moment, honestly.
No, that's fantastic. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I mean, we've got so much information for our listeners. It's absolutely super. I've almost lost my voice. I'm not used to talking for as long. But
I told you you'd have trouble stopping me once I got started.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been really, really good. And hopefully we can have you back on the show later on in the year for some updates and things like that. It would be absolutely brilliant.
Sounds good to me.
And so if people want to find you online, what's their best way? Is it just looking up Chris Haye on YouTube?
To be honest, you can just Google Chris Haye and I come up at the top of most things these days, not to be confused with the MSNBC reporter in the States. I'm the guy with all the cars in the pictures, not, Donald Trump. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So we look up that on Chris Haye on YouTube. And you're on Twitter as well, I believe, yeah?
I am, yeah. So if you just put in Chris Haye on Twitter or Instagram or YouTube, you should find me. That's
super. Excellent. Well, look, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been absolutely amazing what you've covered. And I'm sure you're very, very welcome, because it's been really, really good to find out how you get going on iRacing and R racing. No, it's gone straight in my head again. That just shows you how long I've been doing this for. the R sports. Was it? You've covered Assetto Corsa with this new beta version coming out soon as well, which will be, it sounds like it's going to be spectacular. So there'll be lots of great things our listeners can look out for and can have a go on later on in the year as they improve. Or I suppose iRacing can start straight away, and I'm very keen to have a go myself. So it's been great. Well, I wish you all the best. And it's been fantastic talking to you today. And have a great week. And we'll look forward to catching up with you later on in the year.
You too. Thank you very much.
That's super. You've been listening to the Cardio Advisor podcast show with me, Hugh Hattrick, and my very special guest, Chris Haye. We'll be back later in the week. Bye just now.